Chapter 4 I Will Wait. Even this early, it was hot. The upper seas sprawled along the equator, shallow, landlocked waters choked with weed and fouled with shifting reefs of mud, cut into a maze of lakes and blind channels by the jutting headlands of the mountains. The wind dropped to a flat calm. They left the open water behind them, where it was swept clean by the tides from the sea of morning opals. The floating weed thickened around them, a blotched ochre plain that stirred with its own dim, mindless life. The air smelled rotten. Under Heath's direction, they swung the weed knife into place, the great braced blade that fitted over the prow. Then, using the heavy sweep as a sculling oar, they began to push the Ethne forward by the strength of their sweating backs. Clouds of the little bright-scaled dragons rose with hissing screams, disturbed by the ship. This was their breeding ground. They fought and nested in the weed, and the steaming air was full of the sound of their wings. They perched on the rail and in the rigging, watching with their red eyes. The creature that rode Heath's shoulder emitted harsh cries of excitement. Heath tossed him into the air, and he flew away to join his mates. There was life under the weed, spawning in the hot, stagnant waters, multiform and formless, swarming endlessly hungry. Small reptilian creatures flopped and slithered through the weed, eating the dragon's eggs, and here and there a flat dark head would break through with a snap and a crunch, and it would watch the Ethne with incurious eyes while it chewed and swallowed. Constantly Heath kept watch. The sun rose high above the eternal clouds, the heat seeped down and gathered. The skull moved back and forth, the knife bit, the weed dragged against the hull, and behind them the cut closed slowly as the stuff wrapped and coiled upon itself. Heath's eyes kept turning to Earle. He did not want to look at her. He did not wish to remember the touch of her hand on his. He wished only to remember Ethne, to remember the agony of the moonfire, and to think of the reward that lay beyond it if he could endure. What could a temple wench mean to him beside that? But he kept looking at her covertly. Her white limbs glistened with sweat, and her red mouth was sullen with weariness, and even so there was a strange, wild beauty about her. Time and again her gaze would meet his, a quick, hungry glance from under her lashes, and her eyes were not the eyes of a temple wench. Heath cursed Broca in his heart for making him think of Earle, and he cursed himself because now he could not stop thinking of her. They toiled until they could not stand. Then they sprawled on the deck in the breathless heat to rest. Broca pulled Earle to him.
"Soon this will all be over," he said. "Soon we will reach the moonfire. You will like that, Earle, to be mated to a god."
She lay unresponsive in the circle of his arm. Her head turned away. She did not answer.
Broca laughed. "God and goddess, two of a kind, as we are now. We'll build our thrones so high the sun can see them."
He rolled her head on his shoulder, looking down intently into her face.
"Power, Earle, strength. We will have them together."
He covered her mouth with his, and his free hand caressed her, deliberate, possessive. She thrust him away. "Don't," she said angrily. "It's too hot, and I'm too tired." She got up and walked to the side, standing with her back to Broca. Broca looked at her, then he turned and looked at Heath. A dark flush reddened his skin. He said slowly,
"Too hot and too tired. And besides, the Earthman is watching."
He sprang up and caught Earle and swung her around, one huge hand tangled in her hair, holding her. As soon as he touched her, Heath also sprang up and said harshly, "Let her alone!" Broca said,
"She is my mate, but I may not touch her."
He glared down into Aelor's blazing eyes and said,
"She is my mate, or isn't she?"
He flung her away. He turned his head from side to side, half blind with rage.
"Do you think I didn't see you," he asked thickly, "all day, looking at each other?"
Heath said, "You're crazy."
"Yes," answered Broca, "I am."
He took 2 steps toward Heath and added,
"Crazy enough to kill you."
Aelor said, "If you do, you'll never reach the moonfire." Broca paused, trapped for one moment between his passion and his dream. He was facing the stern. Something caused his gaze to waver from Heath, and then, gradually, his expression changed. Heath swung around, and Aelor gave a smothered cry. Far behind them, vague in the steaming air, was an emerald sail. The Lahal must have come through the dragon's throat as soon as the storm was over. With men to man the rowing benches, she had gained on the Ethne during the calm. Now she, too, was in the weed, and the oars were useless, but there were men to scull her. She would move faster than the Ethne, and without pause. There would be little rest for Heath and Broca and the woman. They swayed at the sculling oar all the stifling afternoon and all the breathless night, falling into the dull, half-hypnotized rhythm of beasts who walk forever around a water-wheel. 2 of them working always, while the third slept, and Broca never took his eyes from Aelor. With his tremendous vitality, it seemed that he never slept, and during the periods when Heath and Aelor were alone at the oar together, they exchanged neither words nor glances. At dawn, they saw that the Lahal was closer. Broca crouched on the deck. He lifted his head and looked at the green sail. Heath saw that his eyes were very bright, and that he shivered in spite of the brooding heat. Heath's heart sank. The upper seas were rank with fever, and it looked as though the big barbarian was in for a bad go of it. Heath himself was pretty well immune to it, but Broca was used to the clean air of the high plateaus, and the poison was working in his blood. He measured the speed of the 2 ships and said,
"It's no use. We must stand and fight."
Heath said savagely, "I thought you wanted to find the moonfire. I thought you were the strong man who could win through it where everybody else had failed. I thought you were going to be a god." Broca got to his feet.
"With fever or without it, I'm a better man than you."
"Then work! If we can just keep ahead of them until we clear the weed." Broca said,
"The moonfire?"
"Yes."
"We will keep ahead."
He bent his back to the scull, and the Ethne crept forward through the weed. Her golden sail hung from the yard with a terrible stillness. The heat pressed down upon the upper seas as though the sun itself were falling through the haze. Astern, the Lahal moved steadily on. Broca's fever mounted. He turned from time to time to curse Vacor, shouting at the emerald sail.
"You'll never catch us, priest," he would cry. "I am Broca of the tribe of Sarn, and I will beat you, and I will beat the moonfire. You will lie on your belly, priest, and lick my sandals before you die."
Then he would turn to Aelor, his eyes shining.
"You know the legends, Aelor. The man who can bathe in the heart of the moonfire has the power of the High Ones. He can build a world to suit himself. He can be king and lord and master. He can give his woman-god a palace of diamonds with a floor of gold. That is true, Aelor. You have heard the priests say it in the temple."
Aelor answered, "It is true."
"A new world, Aelor, a world of our own."
He made the great sweep swing in a frenzy of strength, and once again the mystery of the moonfire swept over Heath. Why, since the priests knew the way there, did they not themselves become gods? Why had no man ever come out of it with Godhead? Only a few, a handful like himself, who had not had the valor to go all the way in. And yet there was Godhead there, he knew, because within himself there was the shadow of it. The endless day wore on, the emerald sail came closer. Toward mid-afternoon there was a sudden clattering flight of the little dragons, and all life stopped still in the weed. The reptilian creatures lay motionless with dragons' eggs unbroken in their jaws. No head broke the surface to feed. The dragons flew away in a hissing cloud. There was utter silence. Heath flung himself against the sweep and stopped it. "Be quiet," he said. "Look, out there." They followed his gesture. Far away over the port bow, flowing toward them, was a ripple in the weed. A ripple as though the very bed of the upper seas was in motion. "What is it?" whispered Earle, and saw Heath's face and was silent. Sluggishly, yet with frightening speed, the ripple came toward them. Heath got a harpoon out of the stern locker. He watched the motion of the weed, saw it gradually slow and stop in a puzzled way. Then he threw the harpoon as far away from the ship as he could, with all his strength and more. The ripple began again. It swerved and sped toward where the harpoon had fallen. "They'll attack anything that moves," said Heath. "It lost us because we stopped. Watch." The weed heaved and burst open, its meshes snapping across a scaled and titanic back. There seemed to be no shape to the creature, no distinguishable head. It was simply a vast and hungry blackness that spread upward and outward, and the luckless brutes that cowered near it hissed and thrashed in their efforts to escape, and were engulfed and vanished. Again Earle whispered, "What is it?" "One of the guardians," Heath answered, "the guardians of the upper seas. They will crush a moving ship to splinters and eat the crew." He glanced back at the Lahal. She, too, had come to a dead stop. The canny Vacor had scented the danger also. "We'll have to wait," said Heath, "until it goes away." They waited. The huge shape of darkness sucked and floundered in the weed, and was in no hurry to go. Broca sat staring at Heath. He was deep in fever, and his eyes were not sane. He began to mutter to himself incoherent ramblings in which only the name Earle and the word Moonfire were distinguishable. Suddenly, with startling clarity, he said, "The Moonfire is nothing without Earle." He repeated, "Nothing," several times, beating his huge fists on his knees each time he said it. Then he turned his head blindly from side to side, as though looking for something. "She's gone! Earle's gone! She's gone to the Earthman!" Earle spoke to him, touched him, but he shook her off. In his fever-mad brain there was only one truth. He rose and went toward David Heath. Heath got up. "Broca," he said, "Earle is there beside you. She hasn't gone." Broca did not hear. He did not stop. Earle cried out, "Broca!" "No," said Broca, "you love him. You're not mine any more. When you look at me, I'm nothing. Your lips have no warmth in them." He reached out toward David Heath, and he was blind and deaf to everything but the life that was in him to be torn out and trampled upon and destroyed. In the cramped space of the afterdeck there was not much room to move. Heath did not want to fight. He tried to dodge the sick giant, but Broca pinned him against the rail. Fever or no fever, Heath had to fight him, and it was not much use. Broca was beyond feeling pain. His sheer weight crushed Heath against the rail, bent his spine almost to breaking, and his hands found Heath's throat. Heath struck and struck again, and wondered if he had come all this way to die in a senseless quarrel over a woman. Abruptly, he realized that Broca was letting go, was sliding down against him to the deck. Through the swimming haze, he saw Earle standing there with a belaying pin in her hand. He began to tremble, partly with reaction, but mostly with fury that he should have needed a woman's help to save his life. Broca lay still, breathing heavily. "Thanks," said Heath curtly. "Too bad you had to hit him. He didn't know what he was doing." Earle said levelly, "Didn't he?" Heath did not answer. He started to turn away, and she caught him, forcing him to look at her. "Very likely I will die in the moonfire," she said. "I haven't the faith in my strength that Broca has. So I'm going to say this now. I love you, David Heath. I don't care what you think or what you do about it, but I love you." Her eyes searched his face as though she wanted to remember every line and plane of it. Then she kissed him, and her mouth was tender and very sweet. She stepped back and said quietly, "I think the Guardian has gone. The hall is under way again." Heath followed her without a word to the sweep. Her kiss burned in him like sweet fire. He was shaken and utterly confused. They toiled together while Broca slept. They dared not pause. Heath could distinguish the men now aboard the hall, little bent figures sculling, and there were always fresh ones. He could see the black tunics of the children of the moon who stood upon the foredeck and waited. The Ethne moved more and more slowly as the hours passed, and the gap between the two ships grew steadily smaller. Night came, and through the darkness they could hear the voice of Vacor howling after them. Toward midnight, Broca roused. The fever had left him, but he was morose and silent. He thrust Earle roughly aside and took the sweep, and the Ethne gathered speed. "How much farther?" he asked, and Heath panted, "Not far now." Dawn came, and still they were not clear of the weed. The hall was so near them now that Heath could see the jeweled fillet on Vacor's brow. He stood alone, high on the upper brace of the weed knife, and he watched them, laughing. "Work!" he shouted at them. "Toil and sweat! You, Earle, woman of the gardens! This is better than the temple! Broca, thief and breaker of the law! Strain your muscles there, and you, Earthman! For the second time, you defy the gods!" He leaned out over the weed as though he would reach ahead and grasp the Ethne in his bare hands and drag her back. "Sweat and strain, you dogs! You can't escape!" And they did sweat and strain, and fresh relays of men worked at the sweep of the hall, breaking their hearts to go faster and ever faster. Vacor laughed from his high perch, and it seemed futile for the Ethne to go on any longer with this lost race. But Heath looked ahead with burning, sunken eyes. He saw how the mists rose and gathered to the north, how the color of the weed changed, and he urged the others on. There was a fury in him now. It blazed brighter and harder than Broca's, this iron fury that would not, by the gods themselves, be balked of the moonfire. They kept ahead, so little ahead that the hall was almost within arrow-shot of them. Then the weed thinned, and the Ethne began to gain a little, and suddenly, before they realized it, they were in open water. Like mad creatures, they worked the scull, and Heath steered the Ethne where he remembered the northern current ran, drawn by the ocean that is not water. After the terrible labor of the weed, it seemed that they were flying. But as the mists began to wreath about them, the Lahal, too, had freed herself and was racing toward them with every man on its rowing benches. The mists thickened around them. The black water began to have a rare occasional hint of gold, like shooting sparks beneath the surface. There began to be islands, low and small, rank with queer vegetation. The flying dragons did not come here, nor the guardians, nor the little reptiles. It was very hot and very still. Through the stillness the voice of Vacor rose in a harsh, wild screaming as he cursed the rowers on. The current grew more swift, and the dancing flecks of gold brightened in the water. Heath's face bore a strange, unhuman look. The oars of the Lahal beat and churned, and bowmen stood now on the foredeck, ready to shoot when they came within range. Then, incredibly, Bakor gave one long, high scream, and flung up his hand, and the oars stopped. Bakor stretched both arms above his head, his fists clenched, and he hurled after them one terrible word of malediction. "I will wait, blasphemers! If so be you live, I will be here, waiting!" The emerald sail dwindled in the Ethne's wake, faded, and was lost in the mist. Broca said,
"They had us. Why did they stop?"
Heath pointed. Up ahead, the whole misty north was touched with a breath of burning gold. The moon fire.